This afternoon, I'm very privileged to be interviewing Renee Zabitzlak. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a nutritionist, relationship coach, and the host of Psychotherapist, the podcast. I love that title.
Thank
She
you.
specializes in trauma, PTSD, high conflict couples, and anxiety in her private practice in Sonoma County, California. She lives with her husband and son and has satellite offices in New York City, Los Angeles, and San Diego. How in the world do you ever find time to take care of yourself?
I don't have any idea. I think that I have an interesting experience of work-life balance that I think differs from a lot of people in that I love my job and it's what I do, not just for a profession. It's just what I do.
Okay.
So I don't generally everybody needs balance from obligation, right? But I don't feel drained by my job. And so I do work a lot, probably more than I would if I did something I didn't love so much.
Yes.
And also I have a lot of help. I have a lot of help.
That makes such a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
We all need help. This morning, I listened to your episode 67 podcast.
Who was that? Was that Matt?
No, it was your personal story.
Oh, mine. Oh, shoot. I get the numbers mixed up. That was my second personal one. That was the illness eating
Yes.
disorder one. Yes. Yeah.
I didn't finish the whole thing, but it did give me a glimpse into your background.
Yeah.
So many of us who end up as therapists or relationship coaches begin our journey in our original families.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the Authority magazine article that your survival tactic as a child was to try to understand what was happening in your family.
Yep.
How did that work for you?
This is a great question. I actually remember my earliest memory is 4 years old, and my mom was pulling me along to go to my father's office to pick a fight with him.
Oh,
And I
gosh.
remember being in my 4-year-old body and having, obviously, I think maybe not obviously, but I assume the thought came in different words than these. But the quality of the thought at the time was, oh, these people are crazy. I have to just keep my head down and get through this. I knew that something was wrong
Yes.
from a very young age. So it evolved into my first manifestation of that was it was an obsessive compulsive presentation whereby I would use counting and rituals and things to feel some sense of control over the chaos in my house.
Yes.
Right. So it didn't work great, the over attending to it, right? Because it did pull me into that space. But I think that a lot of what I know and part of what I bring to my job from that is that I feel relativly unflappable when it comes to the darker parts of the human condition.
Yeah,
You know,
not much can shake you up, right?
No, I think facing so young the fact that the adults weren't well, right, sort of gave me a glimpse at an earlier age than one would hope that people are very flawed, right?
We share a little bit of history here. I was about 3 when I decided I'm going to have a happier marriage than my parents did.
Yes, yes, exactly, yes.
Isn't that, it was kind of incredible. And by the time I learned to read, I knew I would be writing books to help others have better relationships.
Really? See, and my experience was that from the time I was 6, it started when I was about 16. Everyone, strangers, people I barely know, want to tell me things that I don't actually want to know.
Yeah.
You know, and a friend of mine from high school said to me once when we were in our early 20s, and it was one of the many times when we're out, and I end up in an hour-long conversation with somebody about something very personal. And I said to her, why does this happen all the time? Why do people want to tell me everything? And she said, they can tell that you're not judgmental.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing that comes out of dealing with all of that disruption in my family, was not having ideas about what that means about someone if they have content, right? So it was a natural progression for me to get paid to do it because I've been doing it for so many years anyway, for free. So I might as well make a living out of it, right? But I do think that comes from understanding that, you know, all of the people around me were dealing with things, and those things that I had to sort through young, like, again, it comes back to feeling sort of unflappable in the face of that stuff.
I'm going to go, there were so many good tips in your Authority magazine
Thank you.
article, and I hope whoever sees this interview reads the full article. But in answering the question about how to keep the romance alive, you mentioned the need for intimacy and separateness. What
Mhm.
happens when someone expects their partner to meet all their needs?
This is a huge problem for modern relationships. And it's a problem that I think I mentioned this in the article. Esther Perel talks about it in the most beautiful way. And that's really the basis of that whole first book of hers, Mating in Captivity, right? What I've seen in my practice is that it suffocates the relationship. And interestingly, it's the women who notice it first. There is this epidemic right now. I don't even want to call it that because it's more, that makes it sound more negative than it is. But in my practice and in my personal life, women in their 40s and 50s are either ending their marriages or wanting them to be structured differently because they're tired of being all of those things.
Yeah.
And wears the women down more quickly than the men, usually because these are families in which there are also children, and women do so much invisible emotional labor with children. And frankly, to hear the women tell it with their husbands, women who have male partners will tell you that often it feels like having another child, right? And then that's Wednesday Martin wrote a book called Untrue that talks about a lot of the qualitative research around this, about women realizing that they're not attracted to their partners anymore because of this oversaturation of need, right? It's not particularly sexy.
It's like they're always on call.
Always, yes, always, yes, always on call. And so one of the things I referenced in that first interview was this dynamic I've noticed between the younger couples who are overcorrecting for what they saw with their parents who never talked. And oh my goodness, so much talking, so much unnecessary processing. And I tell them, I'm very direct, and I will tell them, like, your sex life's going to die. Like, if you want to be together for decades, think of how much time you have to learn all of these things about each other. You don't need it all up front. Like, you want time. Let your partner figure some things out. Let them learn some things about you, right? We all really want to bring all of our stuff up front right away. And it's great that we're less inhibited about talking about things. And the younger couples, I think, are really, fortunately, they don't have the same expectations for relationships that our generations did, right?
I don't know if you find this true, but I wonder in your clients, if the couples get started because they want to see an improvement in their relationship, and then when they figure out it's going to take work, personal work, they peter out. Do you have that experience?
Interesting that you say that, because almost every couple I work with, I end up doing individual work with both of them, because the majority of the couple issues are individual issues, and they're often family of origin issues. There are obviously things that arise just in the relationship and are contained within that system, but so much of how we interact with those issues comes from things we haven't resolved from our earlier attachment relationships. And so I don't think I have done couple therapy in a long time that didn't include individual work on unresolved childhood issues, because that's half the couple work, right? And so yes, people who are not resourced internally to take on that work are generally not successful in couple therapy.
Which reminds me of something else you said in big, bold capital letters, do your
own work. Yes.
What does that look like?
So I'll give you an example. When I was newer to my marriage, in the earlier years of my marriage, back up by saying my mother was very critical and prone to giving these big, long, critical sort of lectures about, you this and you that and why, and a lot of whys. Why are you that? Why are you this? Why are you that? My husband likes why questions as well. And has imported from his own mother the tendency to adopt a critical tone when he feels vulnerable, which is not uncommon in anybody, and especially not in people who are socialized male, right? Because anger is a much more acceptable emotion than anything else
Right.
with men. So he would learn in his own feeling some kind of way about the relationship, insecure, bad, hurt, he adopts a critical tone.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't understand why we'd have all of these arguments and he would tell me like that I had said things that I believe him. He's a reliable narrator, but I didn't remember saying. I was like, it doesn't even seem to me like I would say that. And likewise, our arguments would escalate because he said he felt like I didn't care about what he was saying. And in my body, I'd be like, that's not the experience I'm having. But here's it took me a while to sort this, but when I was younger and my mom would give me these lectures, what I learned intuitively was not to look at her. What I know now is that eye contact causes us to secrete oxytocin, the attachment hormone, and it's very uncomfortable to feel attached to someone who's hurting you. So when she's yelling at me, I would just look away and go into some sort of dissociative space so that I wouldn't hear her. And what would happen is my sensory register would hear my husband's, why? And it sounds just like my mom and all those trauma memories floating around, that each trauma memory has a sensory detail. So I have so many with that voice. And without knowing it, the trigger then is for me to react exactly the same way. So now when he's coming to me in a state of vulnerability, I'm cutting off our oxytocin supply by not looking at him. I'm dissociating away from what he's saying to protect myself, but this just escalates it. And I don't know how many people who are hearing this care about astrology, but he's a Gemini, which means he has to explain everything 35 times. So he's just talking more and more and more, and I'm going further and further away from him. And it wasn't until the day we both realized I was dissociating in the arguments that I was, and this was before I was working clinically, I was able to put the string together. So here's a perfect example that, you know, there's the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, right? And the amygdala only feels. And the prefrontal cortex is charged with explaining to the amygdala why it's freaking out, right? So when I taught this to my kid, I said, imagine your amygdala is like a troll doll, right? And it starts to feel something bad and it's like, what's going on? What's going on? Why do I feel like this? And it runs to your prefrontal cortex, whose job is to, in this case, to explain to your amygdala what's going on, because your prefrontal cortex can think and reason and things that your amygdala can't do. Problem with the prefrontal cortex is that it's lazy. So I tell people, picture your amygdala running in and your prefrontal cortex has its feet up and it's smoking a cigarette. And so you say, what's wrong? And it just goes, whatever's in front of it. Oh, it's him. He's definitely making you feel bad. He's criticizing you. So what happens is my own brain would tell me this feeling that's coming from these decades of hurt at the hands or at the voice of my mother. My own brain is telling me it's him. He's making you feel that way.
Blame is the first thing we go to, isn't it?
That's the ego's first strategy, right? And also my own brain is telling me that the deep hurt that I'm feeling is being caused by the person standing in front of me and not by somebody 40 years ago.
Right.
And there's an example of how it can corrupt a relationship.
I just had a session with a client this morning about this very topic. How her partner triggers her, but it's not really her partner.
No, and I have found from doing couple therapy for a while that we all choose partners who will stimulate all of our deepest wounds so that we can heal them. And if you're lucky, if you are internally and externally resourced for that work, it's really beautiful. Unfortunately, a lot of us aren't, and then the relationship implodes, right?
Yeah, I believe the real purpose of marriage is to trigger healing for us.
I agree with you 100%.
But unless we know how to cooperate with that purpose, it just goes from bad to worse.
Yes, it does.
I love this topic. I'm going to switch. Inequity in managing household tasks is a big issue for many couples. You mentioned a checklist that the Swedes have created. I want to know what that is and where it can be found.
You can find it online, and it's called the Checklist for Gender Equality in Household Tasks. It's an easy Google search. It was actually a client who introduced this to me. I will be forever grateful. And it is anything you can think of that needs to be done in a home with children. And each partner has a form, and you fill out, it's like a Likert, you know, like sometimes, always, never. who does the task most? Like sometimes this, I do it, sometimes my husband does it. So you fill out one for yourself, one for your partner, and then you compare
Yes,
because those conversations about the equity can go on forever if you don't have some sort of objective
yes.
data, right?
I really am glad I found out about this. I'm going to download it and begin
It's
using it.
brilliant. It
Okay.
is and just seeing the difference in how people can interpret who's doing what is also really fascinating.
Yes, because of course, we always tend to think we're doing more
Of course.
than our partner.
Of course.
There's
Yep.
a little inequity there in how we perceive things.
Mm-hmm.
I loved your advice to just be curious and ask questions. So
Mm-hmm.
describe that a little bit.
So I think it's a huge trap that we all fall into, and I am perhaps more guilty of it than anybody I know, where we always think we know what's going on with our partner, right?
Mhm.
And it's disastrous
Yes,
because a lot of times that's projection. And if
yes,
it's not projection, it's just what has been the case most often in the past. And that space particularly is really, really corrosive for couples. I hear it all the time in couple therapy, which is when one partner doesn't want to give the other the benefit that they are going to make the changes that they're making. And the reason is not always, the reason is most often, well, based on what's happened in the past, I don't have any reason to believe it's going to get better.
yes.
And that's crushing to someone who's trying. Like,
So I refuse to trust you.
right, right. Yeah, it's just I think that it's not just in our relationships with each other, it's in almost everything. I have found that those clients who come to me to start what I call remedial work, meaning something hurts that and they want it to be better, or there's some healing that they need to do. When that happens and they want to stay in therapy, the people who do the work automatically evolves into spiritual work, not religious,
Yes,
but spiritual. And I have found that the holy grail of that work is being comfortable not knowing. I think it is something we
Okay.
do when we haven't really done the work in our spiritual quad that we want certainty. We favor certainty in everything and in our relationships. And being comfortable not knowing what's going on with your partner and asking, but it feels vulnerable. If I don't know, I don't know what's coming, right?
I've also found in relationship to myself
Yes.
that it has been helpful to get to the place where I can let things evolve
Yes.
without needing the certainty of
Mhm.
knowing how it's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm. It's this combination, this twofold thing of trusting your life, which is just knowing that whatever happens, that was the only story you were ever going to have.
Mhm.
Right. And that one way or another, I think, as I'm 53 now, and I don't think I thought this when I was 33, but at 53, I have enough time now to look back on it and go, it all makes perfect sense.
Yes.
It feels like the only story I was ever going to have, all of it,
Yes.
right? And there's tremendous comfort in that. So
There is.
that and the being comfortable not knowing, which is such a problem for us in this culture because we are so overly reliant on cognition.
We want the data.
We want the data, we want to know. Even
Right.
with people come in, why do I feel like this? With certain clients, we get to a point where I start saying, I don't know, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We could come up with all sorts of ideas and we might be right, but more importantly, just instead of needing to know why, let the emotion breathe. And that usually it will release you from any discomfort if you do that. But it's the attempt to sort of pull it up into our brain space and break it down tends to give it legs. Whereas if we just experience it sort of energetically, let it come in and just kind of, that's interesting. Anxiety out of nowhere. See what happens and let it go. It's much more likely to pass through us.
I agree. I found with my own tendency to be anxious and to want answers, if I just reassure myself the answer will come, relax.
Yes.
The
Yes.
answer will come.
It will. It will. Yep. Yep.
I'm going to got rid of my little kitty here who thought
Yeah.
it was her time for attention.
I have my dog in the office every day and I did not bring her today for that reason because she would have popped up right in the middle of the interview. Yeah.
I keep this little bottle of water on my
Clever.
desk to discourage her when the timing is bad. We humans get more of what we notice and praise. Why do you think that's so hard for some of us to do with our partners?
Oh, well, for the same reason it tends to be hard for parents, which is that people want their needs met without having to ask for them. And I think people generally feel that praising their partner, people so often want to not have to ask for it. And the
Yes.
praise feels like that.
Yeah.
Like I'm having to, so it feels like I have to give something to get what I want. Well, yeah, that's generally how it works. But also, this is another example of old business. This is lapsing into child consciousness. Like only
Mhm.
children are supposed to get what they need without asking. And many of us didn't.
Yeah.
And so we carry that need into our relationship and we so want for our partner to give us what we want without asking. I mean, that might be the most common refrain in couple therapy. I shouldn't have to ask. No, you should.
Mhm. You
It's
should.
lovely when they're met without asking, but
Yes.
it's not really what we should expect. And I think the not wanting to reinforce the behavior that we want partly comes out of not wanting to have to be involved in getting it, but it also comes out of conditioning. That's not what was done with us.
Yes.
Again, with parents, so often the parent, I think this is evolving and maybe has even gone very far in the other direction, but for those of us who are a little bit older, it was a lot of hearing more about what you did wrong than what you did right from parents, from
Yes.
teachers. We're a punitive culture.
Yeah.
And so it's just not the instinct anymore, right? The instinct is to notice what you don't want, which, ironically is exactly counterproductive from a behavioral psychology standpoint.
Right. You end up getting more of what you don't want
Exactly.
when that's all that you focus on.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking when I first learned that my husband's love language was words of affirmation. And I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. I was raised in a family where affirmations were never given. I
Right,
was
right.
never praised.
This
I
is, yeah,
was only noticed if I displeased them somehow.
exactly.
So I was really bad at receiving compliments and I sucked at giving them.
Same, exactly the same situation for me. Yep. And
So
my
I,
husband's his
I
words too, and I'm still not great at it. It's a work in progress. Yeah.
well, I literally had to train myself. I would rehearse every day. What can I thank him for today? What can I appreciate? And it wasn't that he didn't have anything. He was a wonderful man.
Sure.
But my reward was watching his face light up,
Right.
when
No,
he
it
got
the behavior will reinforce itself because everything works better
Mhm.
when you do it, but it does feel like, I used to do a lot of parenting coaching. I don't do it anymore. Not by definition anyway, but it would come up a lot with parents too, when
Mhm.
I would spin them into reinforcement and away from punishment. And what I would hear a lot is, well, I'm not going to reward him for something he's supposed to do,
Yeah.
which I would always say the same thing. How's that working?
Yeah,
Not,
right.
it's not working.
It
Do you get a
doesn't
paycheck
work.
when you go to work?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. But adults forget really quickly, that we expect kids to do things we would never do.
Jim and I, my late husband, learned to appreciate and acknowledge even the most ordinary tasks
Absolutely.
that we did that kept our house running smoothly.
Hmm.
It kept things going well. And why shouldn't we acknowledge those
Right.
things?
And this is a big Gottman therapy concept, the culture of appreciation, right?
Yes.
When I work on this with couples, this is exactly what I tell them. Like, it doesn't have to be some Herculean task for which you're
Right.
appreciative. It could be you have to find one thing at least every day, no matter how seemingly benign, like, thank you for putting the toilet seat down.
Yes.
Anything,
Yes.
just find something.
Anything.
Hmm.
You mentioned you and your husband have your own therapist. Tell me why.
It's a great question again. Whew, we have a fabulous couples therapist. She is excellent, excellent. I adore her. We I got pregnant 9 months after we met. So we were in our honeymoon phase when our son was born. So
Mhm.
we went from basically sending our butlers to each other, which is what you do for the first year or so. Nobody's completely, they were sending our most polite versions of ourselves
Yes, of
to
course.
being parents of my kid is, I think the temperament, Dr. Sears, the old baby doctor, calls them high maintenance babies. Like I had a
Mhm.
very intense kid who needed
Mhm.
a lot of attention from me, wasn't a great sleeper, all that
Yes.
stuff. So we had a pretty intense infancy and then we're parents. And then all of a sudden, you know, as a woman, especially, you have a kid and about 2 years after you look up like, oh, here I am,
Yeah,
different,
yeah.
right? But also for us, there were all of these relationship things that we didn't work through.
Mhm,
You know, like it's sort of catching up to us now. Like, oh, there's this
mhm.
thing that I don't actually really like, but I didn't have time to tell you back when we
Yes,
were busy raising
yes,
kids. But
yes.
now, but the other thing is, I think this thing that I was talking about earlier, that I see this thing happening with women in their 40s and 50s, and I have resisted this idea for a very long time, but the longer I do couple therapy and the longer I'm alive, the longer I am convinced that the expectations we have of long-term monogamous commitment are kind of bananas, which doesn't mean
Mm,
it can't happen. I
mhm.
just think we expect it to be natural and easy,
We don't
and
expect it to take work.
we don't, well, people love to, yeah, relationships are work, but not the kind of work it really is.
Yes,
You know, they
right,
think that means buying flowers, not
right.
going into the darkest parts of yourself and being humbled. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
They, it's just, I, I think for us, it's a combination of those early things not being worked out and also realizing that, you know, we're 18 years in, that the relationship needs a slightly different incarnation now, you know?
We change and the relationship needs to adjust to the
Yes,
changes.
it does. It
Yes,
does. And it's also that it's really hard to see your own stuff. You know,
yes.
like I struggle to find therapists that I'm comfortable with. The way that I work comes out of that experience for sure. And
Mhm.
so I'm not always, I haven't always been able to do my own work when I've wanted to and the way that I've wanted to, right? And so I can't always see my own stuff from the inside. And one of the things that happens consistently, I think, to every couple in couple therapy, and I know therapy, it happens to both my husband and to me, is that my husband might try to tell me something for years. Like, you know, you really should do this more. I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. The minute the therapist suggests it, I'm like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yes,
And the other thing, it happened in reverse too, something I've been telling him for 5 years, but having that objective person, it takes away
yes,
all of the other stuff that makes you
right,
not want to hear it from your partner.
right.
I think, especially because I'm a therapist and I think I know everything about relationships.
Yes.
I do. I'm a therapist and I'm a Scorpio. I definitely think I know everything. I need someone to go, yeah, Renee, no, like that's obnoxious,
I
you know?
am so glad that you were vulnerable enough to share that. I think it's wonderful. I'm interviewing a couple dozen therapists, you know,
Mhm.
and you're the first one who's ever admitted that you
Oh,
have your
no,
own.
I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, listen, if I had like a recording of my husband and me fighting and I scrambled the voices, you didn't know who was who, you would
Uh-huh.
really not that you, and if you knew it was me, you might not come back. Like
Yes,
it's just, it's a
right,
lot different when it's your own content.
right. I want to let the viewers know where they can reach you.
Mhm.
You, um, your psychotherapist is on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon.
Yes,
On Instagram, you are at psycho_therapist_Renee,
that's
spelled
right.
with two E's at the end.
Mhm.
And you have a website, psychotherapistthepodcast.com,
Yes,
where I found you this morning. Thank you
yes.
so much for
Thank
letting me
you,
do
Nancy. This
this
was lovely.
follow-up
Yeah,
interview. It will be linked to the written article so that
great,
people who find the video can also take advantage of all the other great tips you put into the article.
great. Thank you so much, Nancy. It was a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Renee.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.